The alarm clock in his room had stopped, and Mr. No was delighted about it. I found this out the way you find out most things about a child in the morning, by going in to wake him and discovering he had no intention of being woken. He was under the covers, wide awake, watching me with the calm, satisfied look of someone who has arranged the world to his liking and is now waiting for the world to catch up. The little clock on his shelf, the one with the loud tick, sat there with its hands stopped. Not broken. When I picked it up, the back had been eased open, and the battery nudged loose, carefully, deliberately by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. I stopped it, he told me, in the tone of someone expecting to be congratulated. And then, because I clearly wasn't keeping up, he explained. If the clock had stopped, then it wasn't time to get up yet. And if it wasn't time to get up, the morning hadn't really started. And if the morning hadn't started, then he could stay exactly where he was, warm, for as long as he wanted. He laid it out for me one step at a time, patiently, the way you explain a simple thing to a slow adult. Each step followed from the last. The whole chain held together beautifully and was, from the inside, completely reasonable. He wasn't lying. That is the part I want to be clear about. He wasn't pretending the clock had broken on its own and hoping to get away with it. He believed it. In his account of how the world was put together, the clock did not report the morning. It held the morning in place, and he had reached in and switched the morning off at the source. He had found the tap the mornings came out of and turned it. I stood there with the little clock in my hand and did the sensible parental thing, which was to tell him to get up. He got up eventually, slowly, with the wounded dignity of a person whose excellent plan is being ignored by the authorities. The trouble with switching off the morning is that the morning does not check the clock to find out whether it is allowed to happen. Everything that has to happen between waking a slow child and getting him out of the door happened anyway, in the usual order, only later and at a run. The clock said nothing, because the clock had nothing to say. It sat on the shelf with its battery loose, while the actual morning went on without it, brisk and unbothered. Breakfast still had to be eaten too fast. A shoe still went missing, and then turned up again, exactly where it had been. The distance between where he was and where he was meant to be kept widening. It would have widened just as surely if the clock had been working perfectly, because that distance had never depended on the clock in the first place. Loosening the battery had only removed the thing that might have warned him, and he was late. Not dramatically, just late enough to be noticed, and for the usual unremarkable consequences to follow. I won't dress it up into a bigger scene than it was. Nobody was cruel to him, and nothing lasting happened. He simply came home a little stung, in the way children are stung by a consequence they can feel the unfairness of, but can't quite find the words to argue against. Because from where he was standing, he had done everything right. He had located the thing that made the mornings arrive, and he had stopped it. He'd gone straight to the source, which is more than most of us manage before breakfast. And the morning had come anyway, on time, entirely indifferent, as though it hadn't so much as registered the enormous act of sabotage carried out against it in the dark. That, I think, was the part that actually stung. Not the telling off, but the plain rudeness of a morning that couldn't be bothered to stay stopped. I didn't explain any of this to him. There didn't seem to be much I could usefully add that the morning hadn't already said, more clearly than I ever could, simply by turning up on time and getting on with things. I might have left it there, filed under the ordinary strange things children do. Then, a few evenings later, I saw the same hands working just as hard at the opposite problem, on a completely different machine. He was playing something on a screen. It doesn't matter what. One of those games that hands you a fixed amount of time. And then, when the time runs out, ends the round whether you are ready or not. There was a number in the corner, counting itself down towards nothing. He watched it out of the corner of one eye as he played, the way you watch a pot you don't want to boil over. He was doing well. He very much did not want it to be over. And so, when he thought no one was looking, I watched his thumb travel up to the corner of the screen, to the number, and try to push it back the other way. The number had been shrinking for a while, and you could feel it. That particular pressure a countdown puts on a room. Every figure lower than the last. Only one place the whole thing is heading. A countdown takes an ending and makes it look as though it is rushing towards you. He could see it coming. That was the problem. I don't entirely know what he expected. Perhaps he half believed it would work and half knew it wouldn't. But the gesture itself was unmistakable. The number was falling towards 0, and 0 was the end. He had reached up to catch it and hold it still, to keep it from arriving at the figure that would finish the thing he was in the middle of loving. And it was the same hand. That was what stopped me where I stood. A few mornings earlier, that hand had reached into a clock to keep a morning from starting. Now it was reaching into a screen to keep a game from finishing. The two things looked like opposites. One shoving the world away to buy a little more sleep, the other clutching it close to keep a good thing going. But both were being attempted by that small thumb, with complete confidence that the number was the thing to be dealt with. I said his name. He let go of the screen the way you drop something hot. The number fell the last little way on its own, the round ended, and the machine went back to waiting, having taken no notice at all of the negotiation just offered to it. Here is the plain version of what he had worked out, and the small thing he had got wrong. A clock counts. That is more or less all it does. It ticks along at a steady pace, and keeps a running tally. And the tally is what we read off its face and agree to call the time. A countdown does something slightly different. It turns the approach of an ending into a number you can watch. One tells you a morning has arrived. The other makes a round's ending visible. To Mr. No, both put the part he could neither see nor hold onto a face or a screen, somewhere his hand could reach. And because it has been put there, he can interfere with it. He can loosen a battery. He can push at a number. What Mr. No had discovered, and he was quite right about this, was that he could stop or move the part in front of him. What he had not discovered yet was how little power that gave him over everything attached to it. The stopped clock did not keep the morning out. Pushing at the countdown did not persuade the game to give him more time. Both times, he reached for the counter, because the counter was the part he could reach. It was the only part with a button on it. I would like to say I explained all of that to him, gently and well, and that he took it in. I didn't, and he didn't. And in any case, I was in no fit state to be lecturing anyone on the subject, because standing in his doorway, watching him wait for a stopped clock to stop the day, I had the distinct and slightly uncomfortable sense that I was watching something I recognized. I do it in both directions too, the same as he does. It's only spread out over a longer life, which makes it much harder to catch myself in the act. There are stretches where I want the counter to hurry, a heavy week, and I notice myself wishing the days along, willing them round to Friday. Everything before then starts to feel like something to get through. I check how much is left the way he checked that number in the corner, except that I'm hoping it falls faster. I'd loosen the battery on a week like that, if I thought for a moment it would help. Push the number on. Skip ahead to the part where the difficult thing is safely behind me. And then there are the other times, pointed the opposite way entirely. A photograph I stay on a good deal longer than I meant to, thumb hovering, not moving to the next one. A particular ordinary evening a few summers back. Nothing that would mean a thing to anyone else. Just an unremarkable hour I would give a great deal to sit inside again for a while. I catch myself doing something with my attention that is not so different from a small thumb reaching up to a screen and pushing the number back, wanting it not to have moved on, wanting the round not to be over yet, reaching, uselessly, for a counter that stopped taking my instructions a long time ago. The gesture is not so different when you get right down to it, only the direction changes, and even that depends on the week, sometimes on the hour. So when I stood in his doorway that first morning, holding the clock whose battery he had loosened to keep a day from starting, I was not exactly a neutral observer of the situation. As for Mr. No, he recovered from the whole business at the speed children keep in reserve for precisely this kind of thing. The morning he was late, he was outraged for roughly the length of one afternoon. By the time he was back in his room, the light had shifted, and the rest of the day had happened without the clock. It was still exactly where he had left it, its hands fixed in the morning. He had moved through the day. The clock had not moved through a minute of it. He looked from the face of the clock to the room around it, and then back again. He did not apologize to the clock. He is not the apologizing kind, and the clock, in fairness, had started it. He opened the back himself, pressed the loosened battery into place, and watched the second hand begin. A few evenings later, when I caught his thumb pushing the number back, and he understood he'd been seen, he didn't look guilty in the least. For about a second, he looked like a man whose brilliant scheme had been rumbled, a flash of, "Oh, all right, fine then." He let the round go and went off to find something else that hadn't ended yet. There was already something else. He went to find it. He was, in short, completely fine. He had filed the information somewhere he could get at it later and gone on to whatever came next. He had been pressing an alarm clock. I have been pressing other clocks for years, with no more success than he had with his. On his shelf, the second hand moved once, and then again.